way things are, from a couple of years on, things are real horrible here in New York, all over.
You're dealing with a lot of people that are maniacs today.
You're dealing with an individual who's very basic, who only knows two things, rip off or be ripped off.
Many of those who make good by being bad are nowhere to be seen these days.
I'd be afraid. Of course I'd be afraid. He's a sick guy. He'd kill any time.
There isn't anything on earth that I will hide from or back up from.
People seem not to understand the close relationship between organized crime and street crime. And certainly in dealing with street crime in his area or any other kind of crime, the uniformed patrolman...
So all the lawyers that worked so hard in this case were on trial for 9 months. We're 3 weeks from an acquittal, all 10 defendants, and the government abandoned the case.
How many times he's done that? We're so mad that, fed up, that I would attack him.
Hello?
Hi, is this Salvatore?
Yes.
Hey, Salvatore.
January 1987. 53-year-old Lowell Harrelson of Bay Minette, Alabama, has an idea. He's the president of National Waste Contractors in his hometown of Bay Minette, and he comes up with a plan to take garbage from a major city, send it to a dump site in order to create methane from the waste. This, in his mind, was a genius idea, because he was taking unwanted trash and creating energy with it. This energy could be used to create electricity, heat buildings, power automotive vehicles, and many other uses. This idea is commonplace today, but back in the 1980s, the idea was just being introduced as scientists and environmentalists found a greater use for our trash in capturing the methane the garbage was emitting. Lowell Harrelson wanted a piece of the action. He decided that New York City was going to be the best spot to get the trash. In order to do this, he would need to make contacts and ultimately get a barge big enough to place tons of garbage on. Lowell would contact Thomas Ronchich, who at that time was the president of Waste Alternatives, Inc., which operated out of Holbrook, Long Island, 50 miles outside of New York City limits. Ronchich would reach out to Thomas Jeswali, who owned a barge loading company in Long Island City, Queens, named Review Avenue Enterprises. He was the only man in town who ran a private company licensed to haul trash on a barge. He would agree to take part in the venture. 4 more waste companies would also come on board. They included Jamaica Ash out of Westbury, Long Island, Allied Sanitation out of Queens, Jet Sanitation out of Islip, Long Island, and Detail Carting out of Ronkonkoma, Long Island, all identified by New York City officials as being affiliated with organized crime. Lowell Harrelson, the man from Alabama with a dream, would learn early on that he had no choice but to deal with the mob if he wanted to get involved in New York City waste disposal. In fact, he would tell NPR journalist Sarah Gonzalez in 2019 that he recalled having to come to New York City in order to have dinner with a man with massive influence in the waste industry, who was also involved in organized crime. He would be picked up in a stretch limo and meet an individual in a New York City restaurant. That individual being Salvatore Avellino, a Lucchese crime family heavyweight, and a man law enforcement believed to have been a Lucchese captain at that time. Harrelson would say, "He was a nice guy. I liked Sal. He was the guy with the talking Jaguar," referencing the infamous recordings of Lucchese boss Tony Dux Corallo speaking to Avellino inside his Jaguar. Avellino at that time was serving as Corallo's driver.
Association, we control the boss, right? Now, when we control the men, we even control the bosses even better now, because now they're even more afraid, right? Now, when you got a guy that steps out of line and this and that, now you got the whip.
These tapes would later be used in the infamous Mafia commission trial. Avellino at that time controlled waste hauling in Long Island for the Lucchese crime family. Professionally, he was the head of Salem Carting Company, or SCC, operating out of Long Island. For his racketeering duties, He was calling the shots at Laborers International Union of North America's Local 66, also out of Long Island. In 1987, he would plead guilty to coercion, in a case where the government stated he was responsible for raising the costs of waste removal and intimidating other carters to do the same. He would be fined $100,000 and be given community service. In 1994, he would be sentenced to 10.5 years in prison and a $500,000 fine after pleading guilty to engaging in a racketeering conspiracy, which resulted in the deaths of trash carters Ronald Kubeka and Donald Barstow in 1989. So now that you know who Lowell Harrelson from Alabama was dealing with, let's get back to the garbage barge. Harrelson arranged for a North Carolina landfill to accept the trash. He estimated that he would generate around $5,000 in revenue per day. In March of 1987, Harrelson secured a lease from Harvey Gulf International in Louisiana. After supplying them with a line of credit, he would receive a barge and tugboat sent from Jacksonville, Florida. The barge, which was named Mobro 4000, was 240 feet in length and would be hauled by a 95-foot tugboat named Break of Dawn, which would be driven by Captain Duffy St. Pierre. The tugboat and barge would make its way to Long Island City's Review Avenue Enterprises, situated on Newtown Creek, and be loaded up with 3,000 tons of Long Island and New York City trash. A large portion of the trash coming from Islip Long Island's landfill in the neighboring town of Hauppauge. Islip at that time was running out of landfill space and were barred from expanding their site any further, due to environmental concerns and fears of contaminated drinking water. This created a huge issue in regard to where they were going to send all their excess waste. The barge would set sail March 22nd and head south to North Carolina. It would arrive in North Carolina at its planned dump site, and that's when things would go sour. North Carolina officials and environmentalists would step in and state that it was impossible to tell whether the barge was loaded up with actual residential garbage. It all started when someone spotted a bedpan on the barge, which raised their eyebrows. In their minds, the barge could easily be mixed with toxic and industrial waste. The barge would then set its sights on new locations. However, it would end up being turned down by Louisiana, Florida, Mexico, Belize, and the Bahamas. After 2 months at sea, the barge was stuck. Lowell Harrelson would say, "I don't know what I'm going to do now. This is costing me $6,000 each day that barge is on the water." He would go on to jokingly comment about how he was going to send it back to New York City. The barge was also gaining significant national attention at that time.
The barge has quickly become a symbol of this country's growing problems with trash.
The most watched load of garbage in the memory of man.
6 ports have already refused the refuse.
In time, Harrelson's idea of sending the barge back to New York City wouldn't be a joke at all, because he would have no choice to tell Captain Duffy St. Pierre to head back. That's where the drama would only intensify. Soon, the story of the garbage barge would take on a life of its own. Captain Duffy St. Pierre would arrive back to New York on May 16th, prompting New York City residents and officials to ponder, what the hell is that? In turn, Alabama's Lowell Harrelson pondered, what the hell am I going to do now? Captain Duffy St. Pierre, who spent 2 months being constantly rerouted out at sea, would also start to break down. He would say, "I can't deal with this insanity anymore, and that's all this is." Things were only getting worse when the barge would be barred from docking back in Long Island City's Review Avenue Enterprises, as Queensboro President Claire Shulman stopped it from returning to where it originally set sail. She would say that she was concerned about pest-borne pestilence from foreign shores, and in her mind, there was no way she was going to let this trash enter back into the Queens streets and get people sick. The barge would then be held up in Gravesend Bay in Brooklyn, just a stone's throw from the Verrazano Bridge. Ultimately, it would become a bizarre tourist destination for New York City residents, and the story of the barge would make its way back into the news cycle. The barge was becoming a sensation. Johnny Carson would crack jokes about it on his Late Show, and TV host Phil Donahue would actually visit the barge and step foot through the trash for his television show. He would refer to it as the most famous 3,000 tons of garbage in the history of the universe. Donahue would even bring Queensboro President Claire Shulman and Alabama's Lowell Harrelson on the show to speak about it. After sitting in Brooklyn for a while, the barge would then be sent up north near Yonkers, where it found a cozy spot just by the George Washington Bridge. The courts would have to rule on what to do with the barge and try to figure out how the situation came to be in the first place. It didn't help that those involved had already been fingered as associated with organized crime. When Lowell was asked about this, he would only say, "I'll just refrain from having anything to say about that until I see what's been said. I have no comment on anything." All of those involved maintained that with the closing of recent landfills in Long Island and New York City, and the lack of expansion of existing landfills, they were doing a just service by finding alternative waste disposal methods. The debate would drag on for months as the floating oasis of garbage sat off New York shores. City and state officials would have to work together to find a solution that would appease all parties, including environmental officials and activists, all the while keeping New Yorkers safe from potential hazards. In June of 1987, the New York City Sanitation Department would construct a plan to unload the garbage at Staten Island's Fresh Kills landfill, the world's largest landfill at that time. However, Mayor Koch would rule it out, based on the principle that he wasn't going to take Long Island's garbage. A Supreme Court judge would further block that idea. New York City Sanitation's Deputy Commissioner of Legal Affairs Kevin Smiley would say, "This is probably the most litigated garbage in the history of mankind." Islip Long Island Supervisor Frank Jones, who was currently dealing with a garbage crisis due to the town's expansion ban, would say that he would be open to taking back some of the garbage, but not all of it, claiming his town was only responsible for some of the waste. He ultimately reneged on that plan, saying that he wasn't interested in playing a game of New York City political football. He would say, quote, "They can haul it over to Gracie Mansion and put it on the front lawn with the rest of the garbage that visits Gracie Mansion." Gracie Mansion being the home of then New York City Mayor Ed Koch. As the meetings dragged on, more insight would be given as far as the financing of this wild plan. Officials of the state's Organized Crime Task Force and the Bureau of Environmental Conservation Investigations Division of Law Enforcement would say that the New York Carters invested $250,000 into this project. Carters who in their mind were deeply entrenched in organized crime. The problem for them was that what these Carters did was not a prosecutable offense. However, in their minds, it was clear that this move by organized crime was just another effort which ensured their expanding control over private sanitation. July 1987. It's closing in on months since the barge left Long Island City, Queens, en route to North Carolina. The barge had now traveled 6,000 miles in its total journey, and was now back in New York City limits, just off the shore between Brooklyn and Queens. Its fate would soon be decided. On July 10, 1987, New York City and Islip Long Island officials finally agreed on a plan. The plan would send the barge to Bensonhurst, Brooklyn's incinerator, in order to burn off all the garbage. From there, the remaining ashes would be picked up and sent to Islip Long Island's landfill in order to be buried. Islip would also receive permission to expand their dump site, solving a huge issue for the town. A number of individuals and entities would have to help pick up the tab for this whole venture. That included Thomas Giswali of Review Avenue Enterprises, Harvey Gulf International, who sent the barge to Lowell Harrelson, and others involved, including Harrelson himself. On Monday, August 24th, the barge was sent to Brooklyn and its contents incinerated. The ash then sent to Long Island as planned. The wild tale of the floating garbage was finally over. In 2019, NPR journalist and host of the Planet Money podcast, Sarah Gonzalez, would do a story on the legend of the garbage barge. She would travel to Alabama to meet with the then 85-year-old Lowell Harrelson. He would talk about how everything came about, and how he heard about the efforts to turn waste into methane. He would also say that at that time, he would be visited by the FBI a few times, because they needed to tell him that he was dealing with the New York City Mafia. Harrelson would say, quote, "It was the worst proposition I ever got involved in, and I'll forever be known as the dummy who sailed the garbage barge." In the end, Lowell Harrelson was no dummy. He was actually ahead of his time. His actions put a spotlight on garbage disposal, and efforts to recycle and transform garbage into valuable energy would begin to rise. Before we go, I think it's time we get a final word from Lucchese Capo, Salvatore Avellino. Because in 2019, while NPR Sarah Gonzalez was speaking with Lowell Harrelson, she also decided to give somebody else a call.
Hello?
Hi, is this Salvatore?
Yes.
Hey, Salvatore, my name is Sarah. I work for an economics show, and I'm doing a story about the garbage barge. I know that it's kind of a complicated story, but I wanted to see if you would chat with me about it.
Well, I really rather not, I'll be honest with you. I want to be polite, but good luck, but I really don't want to talk about it. It was the greatest idea, but I was way ahead of my time. But I don't want to really go into it, okay? I'm sorry.
Okay, do you mind telling me why you don't want to talk about it?
Yes, okay.
Yes, he minds.
And with that, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please like and leave a comment down below. If it's your first time here, please remember to subscribe. Thank you for watching NYC Crime Spot.